I'm Maya, 28 years old, and at my birthday dinner, my stepsister raised her glass and said, "Let's drink to the biggest loser in this family." Everyone laughed, except me, so I raised my own glass and said, "And for the ones who just lost their streaming, grocery, and gas accounts." Silence. Her hand shook, the glass fell, and in that moment, everything I'd been holding in for years finally cracked. If you've ever been humiliated by family and had to pretend it didn't hurt, take 2 seconds to hit subscribe. You're not alone in what happens next. You need to hear. Let me take you back to that morning, the morning that changed everything. I woke up at 6 a.m. on my 28th birthday, not because I'm a morning person, but because I needed time to prepare, time to make everything perfect. Because somehow, in the twisted logic of my family dynamics, I'd convinced myself that if I just tried hard enough, if I just made everything beautiful enough, maybe they'd finally see me as more than the family disappointment. I spent 4 hours in that kitchen, 4 goddamn hours making homemade pasta from scratch, preparing 3 different sauces because I couldn't remember which one Aaron liked, arranging flowers I'd bought with money I couldn't really afford to spend. I set the table with the good china, my grandmother's china, that somehow ended up in my possession because no one else wanted the old stuff. The irony wasn't lost on me. Even dead, my grandmother was more present in my life than the living members of my family. Every plate placement was deliberate. Every napkin fold was perfect. I lit candles, even though it was still daylight, because I thought it would make everything feel special. Warm. The kind of family dinner you see in movies where everyone actually loves each other. Where being together doesn't feel like walking through a minefield blindfolded. But even as I arranged everything, I could feel that familiar knot in my stomach, that dread that settled in whenever I knew Aaron would be around. My stepsister, the golden child who could do no wrong, even when she was doing everything wrong, especially when she was doing everything wrong. At exactly 5 p.m., the time we'd agreed on weeks ago, my phone buzzed. A text from Aaron. "Running late, drama at work. Start without me, XO." The casual dismissal, wrapped in fake sweetness that I'd grown to expect. Of course she was late. Of course there was drama. There was always drama in Aaron's world. And somehow that drama always took precedence over everyone else's plans. I stared at that text for a full minute, feeling something sharp and hot rise in my chest. She knew. She knew this dinner mattered to me. We'd talked about it for weeks. I'd specifically asked her to be on time because, for once, I wanted to feel like I mattered enough for someone to show up when they said they would. But that's not how it works in my family. In my family, Maya adjusts. Maya understands. Maya doesn't make a fuss because making a fuss would be dramatic and attention-seeking. 2 labels that had been pinned to me so many times I'd started to believe them myself. So I texted back, "No problem. See you soon." Because that's what good Maya does. Good Maya swallows her disappointment and pretends everything is fine. Good Maya enables everyone else's selfishness while her own needs get trampled into the ground. Dad arrived first, and the relief I felt seeing his car pull up was pathetic. At least someone showed up on time. At least someone thought my birthday was worth punctuality. He walked in with flowers, grocery store flowers, still in the plastic wrapper, but flowers nonetheless. And for a moment, I felt that desperate gratitude that comes from scraps of affection when you're starving for love. "Happy birthday, kiddo," he said, kissing my cheek. The same distant, obligatory kiss he'd been giving me for years. The kind of kiss that checks a box without actually conveying emotion. But I clung to it anyway because it was all I had. "Thanks for coming on time," I said, and I heard the edge in my own voice, the bitterness I couldn't quite hide anymore. He looked uncomfortable. Dad always looked uncomfortable when emotions threatened to surface. Aaron texted. "Said she's running late?" "Yeah, work drama apparently." I tried to keep my voice neutral, but even I could hear the sarcasm bleeding through. "You know how she is," he he said with that dismissive chuckle. That same chuckle he'd been using to excuse Erin's behavior for the past 15 years. Always something with that girl. Always something. As if her constant chaos was charming instead of exhausting. As if her inability to respect other people's time was endearing rather than selfish. As if her perpetual victimhood was admirable instead of manipulative. Linda arrived next my stepmother, though she'd never asked me to call her anything other than Linda. Not mom, not mother, just Linda. As if maintaining that distance was important to her. As if getting too close to me might somehow taint her relationship with her perfect biological daughter. "Maya, honey," she said, her voice carrying that fake enthusiasm she reserved for our interactions. "Everything looks beautiful. You've outdone yourself." I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her why it was my responsibility to outdo myself on my own birthday. Why I was the one cooking and cleaning and arranging while everyone else just showed up to be served. But instead, I smiled and said thank you because that's what Maya does. Maya performs gratitude even when she's drowning in resentment. They sat down at the table I'd spent an hour perfecting, and we made small talk. Safe conversation about work and weather and anything except the glaring absence of the person who was supposed to be the guest of honor at my own birthday dinner. Every few minutes, I caught myself glancing at my phone, checking for updates that never came. At 6:30, an hour and a half late, we heard her before we saw her. Erin's laughter echoing from the hallway, loud and performative in the way that announced her presence before she even entered the room. She was on the phone, of course, because whatever conversation she was having was more important than acknowledging that she'd kept everyone waiting. "Oh my God, Marcus, you're literally insane!" She shrieked into her phone as she stumbled through my front door. Stumbled because she was already drunk. Not tipsy, not buzz drunk. At 6:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. But this was Erin, so her day drinking was probably just another charming quirk that everyone would excuse. She hung up and made her grand entrance. Arms spread wide like she was expecting applause. Sorry. You would not believe the day I've had. Miranda, you remember Miranda from my yoga teacher training? Well, she completely stole my idea for the mindfulness workshop and presented it as her own. Can you believe that? The audacity. And just like that, my birthday dinner became the Erin show. Again. It was always the Erin show. She could walk into a funeral and somehow make it about her latest drama. She had this supernatural ability to suck all the oxygen out of any room and redirect every conversation toward her own perpetual crises. "Oh, honey, that's terrible." Linda immediately rushed to comfort her precious daughter. "You work so hard on your creative projects. How could she do that to you?" I watched this interaction with a familiar mix of rage and disbelief. Erin had been enrolled in yoga teacher training for 3 years. 3 years. She'd never actually finished the program, never actually taught a class, never actually done anything except collect certificates and complain about how everyone else was stealing her brilliant ideas. But somehow, her imaginary workshop theft was the tragedy we all needed to focus on, instead of the fact that she'd shown up an hour and a half late to my birthday dinner, drunk, without even an acknowledgement that she'd kept us all waiting. "Well, let's not let that ruin Maya's special day," Dad said, and I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he would redirect the conversation. Maybe for once, he'd prioritize my feelings over Erin's drama. "Oh right, happy birthday, sis," Erin said, like she'd just remembered why we were all gathered. She grabbed me in a hug that reeked of wine and whatever expensive perfume she couldn't afford but bought anyway. "Sorry I'm late. You know how it is." "No, Erin, I don't know how it is. I don't know how it is to show up late to everything without consequence. I don't know how it is to make every conversation about myself. I don't know how it is to drift through life without accountability while everyone else cleans up my messes." But I nodded and smiled because that's what Maya does. We finally sat down to eat the dinner I'd been keeping warm for 2 hours. The pasta was overcooked by then, The sauce had developed a skin on top, and the salad was wilted. But nobody mentioned that. Nobody acknowledged that the meal would have been perfect if we'd eaten it when it was supposed to be served. Instead, everyone praised the food while I sat there tasting nothing but the bitterness of being taken for granted. The conversation flowed around me like I wasn't even there. Erin dominated, of course, regaling us with stories of her various creative pursuits and romantic entanglements. She was between jobs again. Something about toxic workplace environments and unappreciative bosses who couldn't recognize her potential. She'd quit her part-time position at the wellness center because they expected her to actually show up consistently, which was apparently unreasonable. "I just can't work in environments that don't honor my creative spirit," she explained, gesturing dramatically with her wine glass. "I need space to grow and explore my authentic self. Some of us aren't meant for the corporate grind, you know?" I almost choked on my wine. The corporate grind. She'd worked 20 hours a week selling essential oils and juice cleanses. But in Erin's mind, any expectation of reliability or responsibility was corporate oppression. "That's so brave of you, honey," Linda cooed. "Following your passion is never easy. Brave. Quitting your job because you don't want to show up on time is brave." Meanwhile, I'd been working 50-hour weeks at a job I hated for 5 years, paying my bills, building my credit, being a responsible adult. But somehow, my stability was boring, while Erin's chaos was inspiring. And then Dad asked the question I'd been dreading. "So what's your plan for income while you're figuring things out?" The table went quiet. Erin's eyes darted to me for just a second, a flicker of panic that she quickly covered with more dramatic sighs. "Well, I'm exploring several opportunities," she said vaguely. "There's this influencer collaboration that might pan out. And I'm thinking about starting a podcast about authentic living. People need to hear real voices, you know? Not these fake lifestyle gurus who've never actually struggled." The irony was suffocating. Erin, who'd never struggled for anything in her life because there was always someone to catch her when she fell, was going to teach people about authenticity. Erin, who'd never paid her own rent or bought her own groceries without help, was going to be a voice for the struggling masses. But nobody called her on it. Nobody ever called Erin on anything. That was my job, apparently, and I'd learned years ago that speaking up only made me the villain. So I stayed quiet while she spun her fantasies. I stayed quiet while Linda praised her entrepreneurial spirit. I stayed quiet while Dad nodded along like any of this made sense. I stayed quiet and felt that familiar burning in my chest, the rage that had nowhere to go, that had been building for years with no outlet. Because here's what nobody knew. I'd been paying Erin's bills for 2 years. 2 years. Her Netflix, her Spotify, her gym membership, her car insurance, half her rent. She'd called me crying one night about being behind on payments, and like an idiot, I'd offered to help temporarily. Temporarily had become permanently, and temporarily had become expected. She never asked any more. The money just came out of my account every month, and she never mentioned it, never thanked me, never acknowledged that her authentic living was subsidized by her sister's overtime hours and skipped dinners. She could afford to quit jobs and explore her creative spirit because I was working doubles to keep her lights on. And the most pathetic part? I let it happen. I enabled it. Because some twisted part of me thought that if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, proved myself useful enough, maybe they'd finally love me the way they loved her. Maybe I'd finally earn a place at this table where I'd never been welcome. "Maya's been doing so well at her job," Dad said suddenly, and I looked up, surprised to be included in the conversation. "Didn't you get that promotion last month?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "Assistant manager." "That's wonderful, honey," Linda said, but her voice lacked the enthusiasm she'd had for Erin's imaginary podcast. "It's so nice when hard work pays off." So nice when hard work pays off. Like my success was a pleasant surprise instead of the result of years of grinding effort. Like I'd gotten lucky instead of earned every step forward through competence and reliability. "Maya's always been the responsible one," Aaron said, and there was something in her tone that made my skin crawl. A dismissiveness disguised as a compliment. "She's got that whole practical thing figured out." The practical thing. Like being a functioning adult was a character flaw. Like paying bills and showing up on time was some kind of limitation, instead of basic human decency. But Linda and Dad nodded along like this made perfect sense. Of course Maya was practical. Of course Maya was responsible. Maya was the one who cleaned up messes while Aaron was the one who created beautiful chaos. Maya was infrastructure while Aaron was inspiration. Maya was the foundation that nobody noticed until it cracked. The dinner dragged on, each conversation feeling like another small cut. Every laugh at Erin's stories felt like mockery of my silence. Every bit of praise for her free spirit felt like criticism of my structured life. I sat there watching my family celebrate the person I funded while treating me like hired help who happened to share their DNA. And then dessert came. I'd made a cake from scratch, of course, because that's what Maya does. Maya goes the extra mile that nobody notices or appreciates. It was chocolate with raspberry filling, decorated with fresh berries I'd spent 20 minutes arranging. It looked perfect, like something from a bakery window. "Oh my God, Maya, this is gorgeous," Aaron exclaimed, and for a moment, I felt that pathetic flutter of hope again. Maybe she'd acknowledge the effort. Maybe she'd recognize that I'd spent hours making this dinner special for all of them. "You're so good at this domestic stuff," she continued, and the hope died instantly. Domestic stuff. Like cooking and caring and putting effort into bringing people together was just a little hobby of mine. Just something I was naturally good at. Like having brown eyes or being right-handed. They sang happy birthday, but it felt hollow. Like they were going through the motions, because that's what you do at birthday dinners, not because they actually wanted to celebrate me. I blew out the candles and made a wish, the same wish I'd been making for years. I wished they'd see me, really see me, not as the practical one or the responsible one or the one who did domestic stuff well, just as Maya. As someone worthy of the same love and attention they showered on Erin without her having to earn it. But wishes don't come true just because you want them badly enough. And the conversation moved on quickly from my moment in the spotlight back to more pressing matters, namely, Erin's latest romantic drama. She'd started seeing someone new, apparently. A musician, because of course it was a musician. Someone who understood her artistic soul and wasn't threatened by her independent spirit. She gushed about him while I cut the cake I'd made for my own birthday and served it to people who were barely pretending to care that I existed. "He's just so different from the guys I usually date," she said, twirling her hair around her finger like a teenager. "He sees the real me, you know? Not just the surface stuff." The surface stuff. I wanted to laugh. What surface stuff? What was underneath Erin's surface besides more surface? She was like a beautiful soap bubble, all shimmer and no substance. But saying that would make me jealous and bitter, so I kept cutting cake and hating myself for enabling this whole charade. As she talked about her new relationship, I found myself thinking about my own non-existent love life. How could I date when I was working constantly to pay for two people's lives? How could I build something real when I was pouring all my emotional energy into this family that treated me like a supporting character in their drama? I'd had a few relationships over the years, but they never lasted. How do you explain to someone that you can't go out because you're covering your sister's car payment? How do you build intimacy when you're so used to putting everyone else's needs first that you've forgotten what your own needs even are? "What about you, Maya?" Linda asked suddenly. "Are you seeing anyone?" The question felt like salt in an open wound. Of course, they'd only think to ask about my life after spending an hour dissecting Erin's romantic adventures. "Not right now," I said simply, because explaining the truth would require admitting things I wasn't ready to say out loud. "Oh, you'll find someone," Erin said with that patronizing tone she used when she wanted to sound supportive but couldn't hide her superiority. You just need to put yourself out there more. Maybe try being a little less serious all the time. Less serious. Right. Because my problem wasn't that I was financially and emotionally exhausted from supporting everyone else. My problem was my personality. I was too serious, too practical, too responsible. If I could just be more like Erin, more carefree, more selfish, more willing to let other people clean up my messes, then maybe I'd find love too. The rage was building now. A steady pressure behind my ribs that I couldn't release. Every word felt like another pound of weight on my chest. Every smile I forced felt like it might crack my face. I was drowning at my own birthday dinner, surrounded by people who were supposed to love me but couldn't be bothered to really see me. And then it happened. The moment that changed everything. The moment when years of swallowed anger finally found its voice. Erin stood up, wine glass in hand, that familiar dramatic flare lighting up her face. I want to make a toast, she announced, and everyone turned to her with expectant smiles. Because of course Erin would commandeer even this moment. Of course she'd find a way to make my birthday about her. To my wonderful sister Maya, she began, and for one stupid, hopeful second, I thought she might actually say something nice, something real, something that acknowledged who I was beyond my usefulness to everyone else. But then she paused, that mean little smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The same smile she'd worn when we were kids, and she was about to pull one of her harmless pranks that somehow always left me humiliated and her looking innocent. Let's drink to the biggest loser in this family. The words hit me like a physical blow. Time seemed to slow down as I watched the faces around the table. Dad's uncomfortable chuckle, Linda's delighted laugh. The way they all raised their glasses like this was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. Like my humiliation was entertainment. The biggest loser in this family. The person who worked 60-hour weeks. The person who paid everyone's bills. The person who cooked and cleaned and organized and sacrificed everything to try to earn a place at this table. I was the biggest loser. And they were laughing. They were actually laughing at me on my birthday, in my apartment, after eating food I'd made with my own hands. They were celebrating my degradation like it was cause for joy. Something snapped inside me. Not broke, snapped. Like a rubber band that had been stretched past its limit for years. All the swallowed words, all the suppressed anger, all the years of being treated like a servant in my own life came rushing to the surface at once. I stood up slowly, my own wineglass in my hand. The laughter died as they saw my face. They must have seen something there that finally penetrated their self-absorbed little bubble. Something that made them realize they'd pushed too far. And for the ones who just lost their streaming, grocery, and gas accounts, I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Erin's face went white as the meaning of my words sank in. Her hand started to shake, the wineglass trembling in her grip. And then it fell, shattering against the floor in a spray of red wine and glass that looked disturbingly like blood. In that moment, looking at their shocked faces, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power, control, the sweet satisfaction of finally speaking my truth, instead of swallowing it to keep the peace. Maya, what are you talking about? Linda asked, but her voice was shaky now, uncertain. I'm talking about the fact that for 2 years, I've been paying Erin's bills, her Netflix, her Spotify, her gym membership, half her rent, her car insurance. While she's been living her authentic life and following her creative spirit, I've been working doubles to keep her lights on. The truth hung in the air like smoke, toxic and undeniable. Dad's face had gone pale. Maya, is this true? Ask her, I said, not taking my eyes off Erin, who was still staring at the broken glass at her feet like it might contain answers. I was going to pay you back, Erin whispered, and even she didn't sound like she believed it. When? I asked. When were you going to pay me back? When you got your podcast deal? When you finished yoga teacher training? When you finally grew up and took responsibility for your own life? Maya, there's no need to be cruel, Linda said, her voice sharp with disapproval. And there it was. Even now, even confronted with the truth of what her daughter had been doing, she was more concerned with protecting Aaron than acknowledging what had been done to me. Cruel? I laughed, and it came out bitter and broken. I've been cruel? I've been paying for her life while she calls me the biggest loser in the family, and I'm being cruel? It was just a joke, Aaron said, her voice small and desperate now. I didn't mean anything by it. It's always just a joke with you, isn't it? Just like when you told everyone at Christmas that I was too boring to get married. Just like when you posted that picture of me sleeping at the family reunion with the caption, "Mood, dead inside." Just like every cruel, cutting comment you've made about me for the past 15 years. It's always just a joke until someone calls you on it. The words were pouring out of me now, years of suppressed truth finally finding its voice. I felt dangerous and alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. You want to know what's not a joke? Working 3 jobs to pay for your creative exploration. Eating ramen for dinner so you can have your yoga classes. Canceling my own plans because you need another emergency loan that we both know you'll never pay back. That's not a joke, Aaron. That's my life. That's what I've been sacrificing so you can play pretend adult while calling me a loser. I never asked you to do any of that, she said, but her voice was weak. We both knew she was lying. You didn't have to ask. You just took. Because that's what you do. You take and take and take, and when someone finally says no, you make them feel guilty for not giving more. I turned to face Dad and Linda, who were sitting there like they'd been turned to stone. And you too. You've enabled this for years. Every time she quits a job, you make excuses. Every time she hurts someone, you tell them she didn't mean it. Every time she fails, you find someone else to blame. You've created a 30-year-old child who thinks the world owes her everything, and she owes nothing back. Maya, that's enough, Dad said, but there was no authority in his voice, just exhaustion. No, it's not enough. It's not nearly enough. Do you know what it's like to be invisible in your own family? To watch everyone celebrate someone else's mediocrity while your actual accomplishments get dismissed as domestic stuff? To be treated like hired help at your own birthday dinner? I was crying now. Angry tears that I'd been holding back for years. But I didn't stop talking. I couldn't stop. The dam had burst, and everything was flooding out. I have spent my entire adult life trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it to me. I've worked myself into the ground, sacrificed my own happiness, enabled your selfish daughter's delusions of grandeur. And for what? So I could be called the biggest loser in the family at my own birthday dinner? I walked to the door, grabbing my keys from the table. Well, congratulations. You finally pushed far enough. I'm done. I'm done paying for Aaron's lifestyle. I'm done making excuses for your cruelty. I'm done pretending that this dysfunction is love. Maya, wait, Aaron called after me, but I was already walking out. Walking away from the table I'd set with such hope, from the cake I'd made with such care, from the family that had never deserved the effort I'd put into loving them. I slammed the door behind me and sat in my car, shaking with adrenaline and years of suppressed rage. My phone was already buzzing with messages, but I didn't look at them. I couldn't. I needed time to process what had just happened. Time to figure out what came next. For the first time in my adult life, I had chosen myself. I had spoken my truth instead of swallowing it. I had refused to be a victim of their dysfunction. And it felt terrifying and exhilarating and completely overwhelming all at once. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. I made coffee and sat on my couch, finally ready to see the damage. The first text was from Aaron, sent at 11:47 p.m. Maya, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you. Can we talk? Then Linda at 12:23 a.m. Maya, honey, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Aaron is devastated. Please call me. Dad at 1:15 a.m. We need to work this out as a family. This silence isn't helping anyone. More from Aaron throughout the night. Please don't cut me off. I need your help right now. I can't afford my rent without you. This isn't fair. And there it was. Not, I'm sorry for hurting you, or I understand why you're angry. Just, I need your help and this isn't fair. Even in her apologies, Erin was making it about her needs, her comfort, her sense of being wronged. I turned off my phone and went to work. I needed normalcy. I needed to be around people who valued my contributions and treated me with basic respect. I needed to remember what it felt like to be appreciated instead of taken for granted. But the text messages kept coming. By the end of the week, I had over 200 unread messages. The family group chat was exploding with drama. Linda was playing mediator, suggesting family therapy and communication workshops. Dad was staying characteristically silent, and Erin was having a full breakdown across multiple social media platforms. She posted long, rambling Instagram stories about toxic family members and emotional abuse. She shared quotes about setting boundaries and choosing yourself. The irony was suffocating. She was using my rebellion against her as inspiration for her own victim narrative. She never mentioned the money. She never admitted to the years of financial dependency. She just painted herself as the victim of an unstable sister who had snapped and cut her off for no reason. Her comments were full of supportive friends who didn't know the full story, telling her how brave she was for standing up to family toxicity. I watched this performance from a distance, feeling a mix of rage and sad recognition. This was who Erin really was. Not the free spirit or the creative soul or the misunderstood artist, just someone who would twist any situation to make herself the protagonist of her own tragedy. The practical consequences hit her quickly. Her Netflix account was suspended within days. Her gym membership lapsed, her car insurance canceled. And suddenly, the woman who had been preaching about authentic living and creative freedom was calling me crying about how she couldn't afford her basic expenses. "Maya, please," she sobbed into my voicemail. "I know you're angry, but I can't survive without your help. I promise I'll pay you back. I promise I'll change. Just don't abandon me when I need you most." Abandon her. I was abandoning her by refusing to fund her lifestyle. I was the villain for expecting a 30-year-old woman to pay her own bills. I was cruel for setting boundaries after years of being used. But something had changed in me during that dinner. Something fundamental and irreversible. I'd tasted what it felt like to choose myself, and I couldn't go back to being a volunteer victim. I couldn't return to the version of Maya who believed that love meant sacrifice without reciprocation. So I didn't respond to the calls. I didn't engage with the manipulation. I let her face the consequences of her choices for the first time in her adult life. And the consequences were swift and brutal. Within 2 weeks, she'd moved back in with Dad and Linda. The apartment she couldn't afford without my help was abandoned, along with the independent lifestyle she'd been so proud of. The creative projects she'd been exploring were forgotten in favor of more pressing concerns, like finding actual employment. Dad called me on a Thursday night, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Maya, we need to talk about this situation with Erin." "What situation?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. "She's struggling, really struggling. She had to move back home, and she's having panic attacks about money. Linda thinks she might be depressed. So she's finally experiencing what the rest of us call normal adult anxiety about finances. That's cruel, Maya. She's family." "So am I," I said quietly. "But apparently, I'm only family when you need something from me." He was quiet for a long moment. "She says you were paying her bills. Is that true?" "For 2 years, Dad. 2 years I paid for her life while she called me a loser and treated me like hired help. Why didn't you tell us?" "Because you wouldn't have cared. You would have found a way to make it my fault for enabling her. Just like you're doing now." "I'm not making anything your fault. I'm trying to understand how we got here." We got here because you raised one daughter to believe she was entitled to everything, and the other daughter to believe she was entitled to nothing. We got here because you've spent 15 years teaching Erin that her feelings matter more than other people's reality. We got here because I finally stopped enabling your family's dysfunction. Another long silence. What do you want from us, Maya? I want you to stop calling me cruel for having boundaries. I want you to stop treating my self-respect like a character flaw. I want you to acknowledge that what Erin did was wrong, and what you all did at that dinner was wrong, and that maybe, just maybe, I deserve better than being the family ATM. You're right, he said, and I almost dropped the phone. You're right, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry we've taken you for granted. I'm sorry we've let Erin get away with treating you badly. I'm sorry it took you walking away for us to realize how much you've been sacrificing. For a moment, I felt that familiar flutter of hope. Maybe they could change. Maybe this crisis would finally wake them up to the patterns they'd been perpetuating for years. But she's struggling, Maya. Really struggling. And I know you have every right to be angry, but could you maybe consider helping her just until she gets back on her feet? And there it was. The but. The qualifier that negated everything he'd just said. Yes, I was right. Yes, they'd treated me badly. But could I please go back to enabling Erin's dysfunction anyway? No, I said simply. Maya, no, Dad. I'm not her safety net anymore. I'm not responsible for her financial planning, or her emotional regulation, or her life choices. She's 30 years old. If she can't figure out how to pay rent, that's her problem to solve. Family helps family. Family also respects family. Family doesn't humiliate each other at birthday dinners. Family doesn't use each other as personal ATMs. Family doesn't expect one person to sacrifice everything while another person sacrifices nothing. I hung up before he could argue further. My hands were shaking, but it was a different kind of shaking than I'd felt at the dinner. This was the trembling that comes from standing up to bullies, the physical manifestation of choosing courage over comfort. The texts and calls continued for weeks, but they were getting more desperate and less apologetic. Erin had found a part-time job at a coffee shop, her first real employment in months, but it wasn't enough to cover her expenses. She was learning what I'd known for years, that bills don't care about your creative spirit or your authentic self. Money is practical and unforgiving, and it requires actual work to obtain. Linda called me on a Sunday morning, her voice tight with controlled anger. Maya, this has gone on long enough. Erin is working now. She's making an effort. Don't you think it's time to forgive and move forward? Is she sorry? I asked. Of course she's sorry. She's devastated about how things ended. Has she apologized? Not for how things ended, but for what she did. Has she acknowledged that she used me financially for years? Has she taken responsibility for her behavior instead of blaming me for overreacting? Silence. Has she offered to pay back any of the money she owes me? Has she expressed any gratitude for the years I supported her lifestyle? Has she recognized that calling me the biggest loser in the family was cruel and unacceptable? More silence. That's what I thought. She's not sorry for what she did. She's sorry about the consequences. And that's not the same thing. You're being unreasonable, Linda said, her voice sharp now. She's family. We forgive family. No, Linda. We enable family. There's a difference. Forgiveness requires accountability, and accountability requires acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Until Erin can admit what she did wrong, not just that things went badly, but what she specifically did wrong, there's nothing to forgive. So what? You're just going to cut us all off forever? Never speak to us again? I'm going to live my life without people who treat me badly. If that feels like being cut off, maybe you should examine how you've been treating me. The truth was, I wasn't cutting them off. I was just refusing to participate in the dysfunction anymore. I wasn't blocking their numbers or refusing all contact. I was just requiring them to treat me with basic respect if they wanted me in their lives. And apparently, that was too high a bar for them to clear. The family group chat that I'd muted but not left was a constant stream of drama. They'd divided into camps, Linda and Aaron against me, Dad trying unsuccessfully to play peacemaker. Every family event became a negotiation about whether I'd be there, whether Aaron would be there, how to manage the situation. I stopped reading the messages after a while. Their drama was no longer my problem to solve. Their discomfort was no longer my responsibility to manage. I was learning what it felt like to live my own life instead of being a supporting character in theirs. And it felt incredible. For the first time in years, my paycheck was mine. I could buy groceries without calculating whether I had enough left over for Aaron's rent. I could make plans without worrying about emergency calls for money. I could invest in my own future instead of subsidizing someone else's present. I started therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand how I'd allowed myself to be used for so long. I wanted to learn how to have healthy relationships based on mutual respect instead of one-sided sacrifice. My therapist, Dr. Martinez, was a small woman with kind eyes who never seemed shocked by anything I told her. "It sounds like you were trained from a young age to equate love with service," she said during one of our sessions. "As if your worth was determined by your usefulness to others." "That's exactly how it felt," I admitted. "Like I had to earn my place in the family by being indispensable. And now that you've stopped providing that service, how do you feel?" "Guilty," I said honestly. "Terrified, free, angry, all at the same time. That's normal. You're grieving the family you thought you had while discovering the family you actually have. That's a profound loss, even when it's necessary." She was right. I was grieving. Not just the loss of my relationship with Aaron, but the loss of my illusions about what our family was. I'd spent years believing that if I just tried harder, gave more, sacrificed enough, I could earn the love that came so easily to Aaron. I was mourning the fantasy of unconditional family love while accepting the reality of conditional family tolerance. But grief, I was learning, could coexist with relief. I missed the idea of having a close family, but I didn't miss the constant anxiety of trying to keep everyone happy. I didn't miss the financial stress, or the emotional exhaustion, or the feeling of being invisible in my own life. 3 months after the birthday dinner, I got a text from Aaron that was different from all the others. "Maya, I got my first paycheck today. It's not much, but I'm proud of it. I've been thinking about what you said, and I think I understand now why you're angry. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. Not because I need money, but because I miss my sister. Can we talk?" I stared at that message for a long time. It was the first time she'd acknowledged that I might have legitimate reasons for being angry. The first time she'd indicated that she wanted to repair our relationship for emotional reasons rather than financial ones. But I wasn't ready. I was still too raw, too protective of the peace I'd found. I was still learning how to live without constantly monitoring everyone else's emotional temperature. I was still practicing the radical act of putting my own needs first. So I texted back, "I'm glad you're working and feeling proud of yourself. I'm not ready to talk yet, but I appreciate you reaching out. Maybe someday." It wasn't a door slamming shut, but it wasn't an invitation either. It was a boundary, something I was still learning how to set and maintain. The holidays came and went without the usual family gatherings. I spent Thanksgiving with friends and Christmas alone, reading books and ordering takeout and feeling the strange peace of not having to manage anyone else's emotions. It was quiet and simple, and exactly what I needed. Aaron sent a Christmas card with a handwritten note. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope you know that I'm working on becoming someone who does. I love you, and I'm sorry for everything." It was progress. Not enough progress to rebuild our relationship, but progress nonetheless. She was starting to understand the difference between being sorry about consequences and being sorry about actions. She was beginning to recognize that love required more than just words. But I still wasn't ready. I was still protecting the fragile sense of self I'd finally discovered. I was still learning that I deserved relationships based on mutual respect, rather than one-sided sacrifice. 6 months later, I was a different person. Not completely different, I was still Maya, still caring, still someone who found joy in taking care of others. But I was Maya with boundaries now. Maya who understood that love without respect wasn't love at all. Maya who knew that enabling someone's dysfunction wasn't helping them. It was hurting both of us. My apartment felt like home for the first time since I'd moved in. It wasn't just a place where I collapsed between work shifts and family obligations. It was my sanctuary, decorated with things I liked, filled with books I wanted to read, organized in ways that made sense to me. I'd started dating someone, a coworker named James, who was kind and reliable and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and feelings. It was strange at first, being with someone who asked about my day and actually listened to the answer. Someone who respected my time and appreciated my efforts, and never made me feel like I was too much or not enough. "Your family sounds complicated," he said one evening after I'd told him some of the story. "That's one word for it," I replied. "Do you think you'll ever reconcile with them?" "Maybe. If they can learn to treat me with respect. If they can acknowledge what they did wrong and commit to doing better. If they can prove that they value me as a person, not just as a resource. And if they can't, then I'll be sad about it, but I'll be okay. I've learned that I can't love people into changing. I can only control how I respond to their choices." It was the hardest lesson I'd ever learned, but also the most liberating. I wasn't responsible for fixing my family's dysfunction. I wasn't obligated to accept mistreatment in the name of love. I wasn't required to set myself on fire to keep other people warm. A year after the birthday dinner, Erin called me. Not texted, called. Her voice was different somehow, less performative, more genuine. "Maya, I know you said you weren't ready to talk, but I wanted you to know that I've been in therapy for 6 months now. I'm starting to understand some things about myself that I didn't want to see before." I was quiet, listening. "I've been selfish, not just with money, but with everything. I've been so focused on what I needed, what I wanted, what I deserved, that I never considered what I was taking from other people. Especially you." "Okay," I said carefully. "I've been working 2 jobs and living at home, and I finally understand what it feels like to be financially stressed. To have to choose between things you want because you can't afford both. To worry about bills and plan for expenses and live within your means. And I realized that while I was learning these basic life skills at 30, you'd been doing all of that plus supporting me. I can't imagine how exhausting that must have been." She was crying now, but it didn't sound manipulative. It sounded genuine. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she continued. "I don't expect you to trust me or help me or even want a relationship with me. But I needed you to know that I understand now what I did to you. I stole years of your life. I stole your security and your peace and your ability to build your own life. And I called you a loser while I was doing it." I was crying too. But they were different tears than I'd cried that night at dinner. These were tears of recognition, of grief, of something that might eventually become forgiveness. "I've saved up enough money to start paying you back," she said. "It's going to take a long time, years, probably, but I want to pay back every penny I took from you. Not because I think it will fix everything, but because it's the right thing to do. Erin, I know money can't undo the hurt I caused. I know I can't take back the years of treating you badly, but I want to try to make amends in whatever way I can." We talked for 2 hours that night. Really talked, maybe for the first time in our lives. She told me about therapy, about the hard work of examining her own behavior, about the painful process of taking responsibility for the ways she'd hurt people. I told her about my own therapy, about the boundaries I'd learned to set, about the life I was building for myself. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. A recognition that we might someday be able to have a real relationship based on mutual respect instead of dysfunction and resentment. We started slowly. A text here and there, checking in without any financial requests or family drama. She sent me pictures of the books she was reading, articles she thought I'd find interesting, small updates about her life that weren't crises requiring my intervention. I told her about James, about work, about the apartment renovations I was finally able to afford. It felt strange to share my life with her as an equal instead of as a service provider, but it also felt hopeful. The rest of the family was slower to understand. Dad and Linda were confused by our tentative reconciliation, seemed to think it meant everything was back to normal. They invited me to Easter dinner like nothing had happened, like we could just pretend the past year of silence had been a minor misunderstanding. "I'm not ready for family gatherings yet," I told Dad when he called. "But you and Erin are talking again. I thought everything was better now. Erin and I are working on our relationship because she's acknowledged what she did wrong and is making amends. The rest of you haven't done that work yet. What do you want from us, Maya? What would it take?" It was a fair question, and I'd thought about it a lot in therapy. I want acknowledgement that the way you all treated me was wrong. Not just that night at dinner, but for years. I want recognition that I was taken advantage of financially and emotionally. I want to know that you understand why I had to walk away, and that you respect my decision to set boundaries. But we're family. Being family doesn't give you permission to treat me badly. If anything, it should mean you hold yourselves to a higher standard, not a lower one. It was a conversation we would have many times over the next few months. Slowly, painfully, they began to understand. Dad apologized for enabling Erin and dismissing my feelings. Linda admitted that she'd been more concerned with protecting her daughter than with treating me fairly. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when they slipped back into old patterns, when they expected me to be the accommodating one, the understanding one, the one who bent over backward to keep everyone comfortable. But now I had the tools to recognize those moments and the confidence to speak up. "I'm not responsible for managing everyone's feelings," became my mantra. "I'm not required to sacrifice my well-being for other people's comfort." 2 years after that birthday dinner, we had another family gathering. But this one was different. This time, Erin contributed to the cooking instead of showing up late and empty-handed. This time, the conversation included my life and interests instead of revolving entirely around her drama. This time, when someone made a cutting joke, the others called it out instead of laughing along. It wasn't perfect. We were all still learning how to have healthy relationships with each other, but it was real in a way our family had never been before. It was based on choice and respect rather than obligation and resentment. Erin had been making monthly payments toward her debt to me, small amounts that she could afford without compromising her own stability. It wasn't about the money anymore. I'd long since written off that loss as tuition for learning about boundaries. But the fact that she was making the effort meant everything. It showed that she understood the weight of what she'd taken from me. "I know I can never really make up for what I did," she said to me one evening as we walked through the park near my apartment. "But I want you to know that I think about it every day. Every time I pay a bill or buy groceries or make a responsible choice, I remember that you were doing all of that plus supporting me, and I'm grateful, even though I know I don't deserve gratitude." "You're working on deserving it," I said. "That's what matters now." She'd been dating someone new, a teacher who seemed to appreciate her efforts toward stability rather than being attracted to her chaos. She talked about him the way I talked about James, with respect and affection and realistic expectations rather than dramatic passion and unrealistic fantasies. "I think I'm finally growing up," she said, and for the first time, I believed her. My own life had flourished in ways I'd never expected. Without the constant drain of supporting someone else's dysfunction, I had energy for my own goals and dreams. I'd gotten another promotion at work, started taking art classes, began saving for a house, I was building the life I'd always wanted but never thought I deserved. James and I had moved in together, and the relationship was everything I'd thought was impossible for someone like me. It was stable and supportive and filled with the kind of daily kindness I'd never known I was missing. He saw my caretaking tendencies not as obligations to exploit, but as qualities to appreciate in moderation. "You don't have to take care of everyone," he reminded me when I started to slip back into old patterns. "You can be caring without being consumed." It was still hard sometimes. The urge to fix and rescue and sacrifice was deeply ingrained, but I was learning to channel those impulses in healthier ways. Volunteering at the animal shelter, mentoring younger coworkers, showing care through presence rather than financial support. Dr. Martinez had helped me understand that my caretaking wasn't inherently unhealthy. It was the lack of boundaries around it that had been the problem. Learning to care for others, while also caring for myself, had been the real work of recovery. "You're not responsible for other people's choices," she'd reminded me countless times. "You're only responsible for your own responses to their choices." It seemed simple, but it had been revolutionary. I could love Erin without funding her irresponsibility. I could care about my family without accepting their mistreatment. I could be generous without being exploited. Looking back now, that birthday dinner felt like a death and a birth happening simultaneously. The death of the version of Maya who believed love meant endless sacrifice. The birth of the version who understood that love meant mutual respect and reciprocal care. The woman who had stood up that night and finally spoken her truth had been someone I didn't even know I could become. Strong and clear and unapologetic about her own worth. She'd been waiting inside me for years, buried under layers of people-pleasing and desperate accommodation. But she'd been there all along, waiting for the moment when the pain of staying silent became greater than the fear of speaking up. That moment had come at exactly the right time, even though it had felt like the worst possible time, even though it had shattered the fragile peace I'd been trying to maintain, even though it had forced me to confront the reality that the family I'd been trying so hard to belong to had never actually wanted me as I could serve them. Sometimes peace looks like losing people you once begged to understand you. I didn't lose that night I found myself. I found my voice, my boundaries, my sense of worth that didn't depend on other people's approval or appreciation. The Maya who had prepared that birthday dinner with such hope and desperation felt like a different person now. Someone I felt compassion for but could no longer be. She had done the best she could with the tools she had, but those tools hadn't been enough to build a healthy life. She'd needed to learn new skills, develop new perspectives, discover new ways of being in the world. The process hadn't been easy. There had been lonely nights and difficult conversations and moments of doubt when I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake, when the isolation felt worse than the exploitation, when the silence felt more painful than the humiliation. But those moments had passed, and what remained was something I'd never had before. Authentic self-respect, not the kind that came from other people's validation, but the kind that came from knowing I would stand up for myself when it mattered. The kind that came from refusing to accept less than I deserved, even when that meant walking away from people I loved. The birthday dinner had been the catalyst, but the real work had happened in the months and years that followed. The daily practice of choosing myself without feeling guilty about it. The gradual unlearning of patterns that had been decades in the making. The slow, careful rebuilding of relationships on healthier foundations. Erin and I would never have the relationship I'd once desperately wanted, the close sisterhood I'd imagined was possible if I just tried hard enough. But we had something better now. A real relationship based on truth rather than fantasy. One where both of us took responsibility for our own choices and behaviors. One where care flowed both directions instead of just one. The family gatherings were smaller now, less dramatic, more genuine. We'd lost some of the performance and gained some authenticity. It wasn't the Hallmark movie version of family love, but it was honest. And honesty, I'd learned, was the foundation of everything real and lasting. If you've ever had to walk away from family, Tell me your story in the comments. Let's remind each other that choosing peace isn't weakness, it's courage. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never face your story alone again. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop trying to earn love from people who've already decided you're not worth their effort. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's dysfunction. Sometimes the healthiest choice is the one that hurts the most in the moment but heals everything in the long run. That birthday dinner changed my life. Not because of what they did to me, but because of how I finally chose to respond. After years of swallowing my truth to keep their peace, I finally spoke up. After years of accepting scraps and calling it love, I finally demanded respect. After years of being the family ATM, I finally closed the account. And in doing so, I opened up a life I'd never imagined was possible. A life where my worth wasn't determined by my usefulness, where my love wasn't measured by my willingness to be exploited, where my voice mattered just as much as anyone else's. The woman who walked out that night was someone I'm proud to have become. Someone who knows her worth and insists that others recognize it too. Someone who loves deeply but not destructively. Someone who understands that the healthiest relationships are built on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. That's who I am now. That's who I fought to become. And every day I choose to remain her, no matter how much easier it might be to slip back into the old patterns of accommodation and appeasement. Because I've learned that peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of authenticity. And authenticity, real authenticity, requires the courage to disappoint people who expect you to remain small for their comfort. I found that courage at a birthday dinner when I was 28 years old, and I've been practicing it every day since, building a life that honors the woman who finally learned to speak up for herself when it mattered most.